It was a quiet evening, the kind where the air feels heavy with unspoken memories. I stood at the gates of my new home. A villa so grand it almost didn't feel real. The white stone walls reflected the golden glow of the sunset. And for a moment, I just let myself breathe it in. The silence, the beauty, the victory. Behind me, whispers rippled through the crowd that had gathered. Old neighbors, distant relatives, even so-called friends who once laughed at me now stared with mouths slightly open, trying to hide their shock. I caught a voice in the distance. "Is that really his place?" "No, it can't be," another chimed in, almost bitterly, after all these years. "Look at him now." Their words floated to my ears like smoke, bitter yet satisfying. I wanted to smile, but instead I let my silence speak. Because in that moment, I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to explain the nights I spent working until my body gave out, or the days when hunger was my closest companion. They didn't know, and honestly, they didn't care back then. All they saw now was the villa. The proof. The undeniable success standing in front of them like a slap to their arrogance. My eyes traced the curves of the tall iron gate, the polished wood doors, the wide glass windows that caught the light just right. To anyone else, it was just a house. To me, it was a fortress built on scars, betrayal, and a kind of pain no one had seen but me. You see, these same people, the ones now pretending to be impressed, once looked at me as if I was nothing. They laughed when my pockets were empty. They whispered when I couldn't afford the clothes they wore, the cars they drove, or the lifestyle they bragged about. I remember the sting of their words, the sneers when I showed up with worn-out shoes, the way they rolled their eyes as if my existence itself was a joke. And now, suddenly, I was worth remembering. Suddenly, they wanted to know how I did it. What miracle had fallen into my lap? Why fate had chosen me of all people? They didn't know yet that every brick of this villa was paid for not with luck, but with blood, sweat, and nights when I thought I wouldn't make it to the next morning. As I unlocked the gate and stepped inside, I couldn't help but think back to those darker days. My hand brushed against the smooth steel of the key, and a memory hit me. A cold night years ago when I had nothing but a torn wallet and the weight of my failures pressing down on me. Back then, no one opened their doors. No one offered a kind word. They left me outside in the cold, and in that loneliness, I promised myself something. One day, they will see me differently, and here I was, living that promise. I paused at the entrance, letting the crowd drink in the sight a little longer. Their silence was louder than their laughter ever had been. The same mouths that once mocked me had no words now. The irony was almost poetic, but I didn't gloat. No, wait, this wasn't about showing off. This was about reclaiming the dignity they tried to strip away. This villa wasn't just my home, it was my statement. My reminder to them, and to myself, that even when the world turns its back on you, there is power in rising silently and returning stronger than they ever imagined. I glanced back once more, catching the eyes of those who had once mocked me the loudest. Their smiles were fake now, plastered on like masks, desperate to rewrite history. They wanted to pretend they'd always believed in me, that they hadn't been part of my downfall. But I remembered. Oh, I remembered every laugh, every cruel word, every time they let me drown while they watched from the shore. And as the heavy doors of the villa closed behind me with a deep echo, I whispered to myself almost like a vow, this is just the beginning. If they think the villa is the whole story, they don't know anything yet. When I look back now, it almost feels like a lifetime ago. Those years when dreams were bright, but my pockets were empty. I used to believe that hard work alone could change everything. I believed that if I pushed myself, sacrificed enough, and kept moving, life would eventually reward me. But life, it had other plans. I remember standing in front of the mirror one morning, my tie hanging loose around my neck, convincing myself that today would be the day something finally worked out. Yet by nightfall, I would return with nothing but rejection letters, empty promises, and the same gnawing hunger in my stomach. Money slipped through my fingers faster than I could hold it. Small jobs, odd shifts, endless hours, and I tried them all. But no matter how hard I pushed, it was never enough. And people saw my struggle not as effort, but as failure. Relatives would chuckle when I entered the room, their voices lowered, but not enough for me to miss their words. He's still chasing dreams? At his age? When will he learn? Friends I once laughed with began avoiding me, as if my misfortune might rub off on them. Even family dinners turned into silent courts of judgment, every glance reminding me I hadn't measured up. What hurt wasn't just the poverty, it was the shame. The feeling of being less than everyone else. Walking past neighbors who shook their heads, watching cousins flaunt their success while slipping me pity-filled smiles. I wanted so badly to tell them that I wasn't lazy, that I wasn't hopeless. But my voice carried no weight. In their eyes, I was already defeated. Still, I kept trying. I took jobs no one else wanted, scrubbing floors until my back ached, carrying boxes until my hands blistered, working nights that blurred into mornings. Each day I told myself it was temporary. Each day I hoped someone would see the effort, would remember the sacrifices I had made for them before. But instead of gratitude, I was met with smirks and whispers. Sometimes I lay awake at night, staring at the cracked ceiling of my tiny rented room, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I had once been the one people leaned on, the one who lent money, the one who offered help without hesitation. Yet when my turn came, when I needed just a little bit of kindness, the world turned its back. Those were the years that broke me down, stripped away the pride I once carried. And yet, deep in that emptiness, a stubborn fire began to burn. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself that one day I would rise from this. One day, they would regret ever laughing at my empty pockets. That promise. It became my only companion. There's a kind of pain that cuts deeper than hunger or exhaustion. It's the pain of realizing that your sacrifices meant nothing to the people you gave them to. I used to think family would always remember. That when you give everything you have, even if it's little, they hold it in their hearts. But I was wrong. My sacrifices weren't remembered. They were erased, twisted into weakness, mocked as foolishness. I can still recall the faces of those I helped when I had so little myself. The cousin who came to me crying because he couldn't pay his rent. I emptied my savings to keep a roof over his head. The friend who needed a loan for his business. I gave what I had, even when I was skipping meals to survive. And the siblings, the ones who smiled wide when I brought groceries, when I paid bills, when I stood as a shield in their hardest times. Back then, they hugged me. They called me kind, dependable, selfless. They promised they would never forget. But years later, when I had nothing left to give, those same people didn't just forget, they turned cold. Their gratitude vanished like smoke, replaced by sneers and jokes behind my back. I'll never forget one evening when I knocked on a relative's door, not for money, just for company. For someone to remind me that I still mattered. He opened the door halfway, stared at me with those eyes full of judgment and muttered, "I don't have time for this right now." Then he shut the door. Just like that. As if I were a stranger. Or worse, a beggar. And then came the laughter. Quiet at first, then louder, bolder, as if my pain was a show for their amusement. They called me a man with big dreams but empty hands. They joked that I was cursed, that I was destined to fail no matter what I tried. Each word was a dagger, sharper than anything poverty could inflict. It wasn't just the strangers. It was the people I had bled for, the ones I believed would always stand beside me. The betrayal cut deeper because it came from within. Nights alone became heavier. I replayed their voices in my head, over and over, until it felt like I was drowning in the echo of their laughter. My sacrifices, my loyalty, my kindness, all of it had been wasted. To them, I was nothing but a fool. And yet, in that darkness, something inside me began to shift. Every cruel laugh, every door slammed in my face, every sneer carved itself into my memory. I carried those wounds not as scars, but as fuel. Because if my sacrifices meant nothing to them, then my revenge, my rise, would mean everything. I didn't know how. I didn't know when, but deep down, I swore to myself that one day I would give them a reason to remember me, not as the man they mocked, but as the man they could never laugh at again. There comes a moment when whispers turn into open ridicule, when the people who once pretended to care stop hiding their cruelty. For me, that moment stretched across years, until their laughter became the background music of my life. I remember one family gathering in particular. The house was filled with chatter, the smell of food, the clinking of glasses. I sat quietly at the table, trying to blend in, trying to pretend that I still belonged. But the jokes started, subtle at first, then bolder with every laugh. One uncle leaned over and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "So, still chasing castles in the sky? Or did reality finally slap you in the face?" The table erupted in laughter. I smiled weakly, though inside my chest burned. A cousin joined in, smirking. Maybe he should write a book on how not to succeed. At least then he might make some money. Even my siblings, the ones I had supported when they had nothing, didn't defend me. Instead, they chuckled along, afraid to lose their place among the mockers. That betrayal cut deeper than all the others. It's one thing to be mocked by outsiders, but when your own blood joins in, it leaves scars that never fade. I sat there, staring at my plate, every word like acid on my skin. I wanted to shout, to remind them of the nights I stayed awake working so they could eat, of the bills I paid when their pockets were empty, of the times I chose their comfort over my own. But what good would it have done? To them, my sacrifices were forgotten, erased by the story they now told, the story of my failure. From that day, I began noticing how quickly the masks slipped. Friends avoided me in public, afraid to be associated with my bad luck. Neighbors would laugh openly as I walked past, their voices carrying in the evening air. I even overheard one woman say to another, "He'll die with nothing. Some people are just cursed." They didn't lower their voices. They wanted me to hear, and yet, as much as their cruelty wounded me, it also awakened something. Each insult became a stone I carried, each laugh a fire that burned in my chest. They thought they were burying me under shame, but they didn't know they were planting the seeds of my resolve. I began to see them for what they truly were. Not family, not friends, just opportunists who only valued people when they could benefit from them. And when I had nothing left to give, I became invisible. Or worse, their entertainment. The pain was unbearable at times. I remember walking home one evening, the weight of their words heavy on my shoulders. I sat on the steps of my tiny rented room, staring into the dark street, and I whispered to myself, "They will regret this. Every single one of them." It wasn't a cry of anger. It was a vow. A vow carved into me by their betrayal, and slowly, quietly, that vow began to shape me. I stopped chasing their approval. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who would never see it. Instead, I began building a wall around my heart. Behind that wall, I was planning, preparing, waiting for the day when the laughter would choke in their throats. They didn't know it yet, but their cruelty was forging something stronger inside me. Something they would one day face. And never forget. There's only so much a man can take before something inside him snaps. For me, that moment came on a night I will never forget. It was another family gathering, another evening where laughter came at my expense. I had gone there out of habit, still clinging to the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be different. But I should have known better. This time the jokes weren't whispered or disguised. They were sharp, cruel, and deliberate. Someone joked that I should be hired as the family clown since I had nothing better to do. Another smirked and asked if I wanted leftovers to take home, as if I couldn't afford food on my own. Even my siblings laughed, their eyes avoiding mine, too cowardly to defend me. I sat there in silence, letting their words wash over me like poison. Every laugh felt like a knife, every smirk like a slap across my face. I felt small, invisible, powerless, but then something shifted. As I looked around the room, something inside me hardened. These weren't my people anymore. They hadn't been for a long time. They were strangers wearing the faces of family, parasites feeding off my dignity. And in that moment, I knew I didn't owe them anything. Not my presence, not my explanations, not my loyalty. So I stood up, quietly, no dramatic speech, no angry outburst, just silence. The kind of silence that carries more weight than any words could. A few heads turned, confused, but no one stopped me. Why would they? To them, I was already irrelevant. I walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes on my back and the fire in my chest. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Not because I had escaped poverty, but because I had finally escaped them. That night, as I lay on my thin mattress in my small rented room, I made a vow. I whispered it into the darkness like a prayer, like a warning. They will never laugh at me again. I decided then that I would disappear from their lives. No calls, no visits, no desperate attempts to prove my worth. Let them believe I had given up. Let them mock me in my absence. I would vanish into silence. And in that silence, I would build something they could never imagine. The next morning, I packed what little I had and left. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just a quiet exit from the life that had been suffocating me. I moved to a new city where no one knew my failures, no one recognized my face, no one had heard the laughter that haunted me. And there, I began again. From the bottom, small jobs, long hours, sleepless nights, I saved every coin, every dollar, guarding them like treasures. I worked harder than I ever had, not out of desperation this time, but out of vengeance. Every blister on my hands, every ache in my bones reminded me of the promise I had made, that one day I would return not as the man they mocked, but as the man they could never mock again. It was a lonely path, filled with struggles I couldn't share with anyone. But the loneliness didn't break me, it sharpened me. Their betrayal had burned away every weakness, leaving behind only resolve. And as the years passed, while they laughed in my absence, I was laying the foundation of something far greater than they could ever dream. The years that followed were some of the hardest of my life, and yet, strangely, the most freeing. In that new city, no one knew me. No one whispered behind my back. No one mocked me at family dinners. No one looked at me as a failure. I was just another face in the crowd, another man hustling to survive. And for the first time in years, that anonymity felt like a gift. I started small, very small. A night shift at a warehouse, hauling boxes until my arms shook. A part-time job at a diner, scrubbing dishes until my fingers cracked. I took whatever work came my way, no matter how dirty, no matter how tiring. Every coin I earned, I saved. Every dollar I guarded. There were nights when sleep was a luxury, when I'd stumble home as the sun was rising, too exhausted to even eat. There were days when I lived on scraps, sacrificing comfort for the sake of tomorrow. But unlike before, this time I wasn't giving my strength to others who would forget me. This time I was building for myself. Still, the road was brutal. I remember one winter when my heater broke, and I shivered under 3 blankets just to make it through the night. I could have used the little money I had to fix it, but instead I saved it. Every sacrifice was fuel. Every moment of discomfort whispered to me, hold on. One day, this will all mean something, and slowly. It did. I learned skills. I watched others closely, studied how businesses worked, how money flowed. I started helping out in small shops, then managing shifts, then picking up side hustles. I said little, but I listened to everything. Piece by piece, I began to understand the game. Years passed, and the man they once mocked for being empty-handed was no longer scraping by. My savings grew, my confidence returned, and opportunities began to open. I invested carefully, took chances when the timing felt right. Each success was quiet, hidden, tucked away where no one from my past could see. Because that was the plan. Silence. Let them believe I was still struggling. Let them think I had vanished in defeat. I wanted them unprepared for what was coming. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think back to their laughter. I'd hear those cruel words echoing in my head, and instead of breaking me, they pushed me harder. Every insult became a reminder of why I couldn't give up. Every sneer became a voice telling me to keep going until I could silence them all. And as the years rolled on, something incredible happened. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rising. Quietly, steadily, brick by brick, I was building the life they swore I would never have. I moved from that tiny room into a modest apartment. I traded broken-down shoes for sturdy ones. I started dressing with pride again, carrying myself not like a man defeated, but like a man preparing for victory. And though no one from my past was there to see it, I knew this was only the beginning, because the day was coming. The day when the man they left behind would return, not empty-handed, not begging for scraps, but standing taller than they ever imagined. I didn't know exactly how or when, but deep in my heart I felt it. The rise had already begun. The day I returned was brighter than I expected. The sun clung to the rooftops, painting the old neighborhood in gold, as if mocking the memories buried there. My hands gripped the wheel of a car I once only dreamed of driving, its quiet hum a reminder of how far I had come. Every turn of the road brought me closer to the place I had sworn to leave behind, yet also closer to the moment I had been building toward all these years. When I pulled up outside the villa, silence fell inside the car. It stood there, majestic and flawless, a monument of everything they thought I could never achieve. White walls glistened, tall windows reflected the sky, and the iron gates creaked open with the weight of triumph. It wasn't just a house. It was proof. Proof that I had risen from the ashes they scattered me into. I stepped out, and the gravel crunched beneath my shoes. Neighbors, once witnesses to my humiliation, now stared with wide eyes and parted lips. Some whispered, others nudged each other in disbelief. I didn't need to say a word. The sight of me, standing there with confidence in my stride, spoke louder than anything I could have ever shouted back then. Inside the villa, the air carried the scent of new beginnings, polished wood, fresh paint, untouched marble floors. Every corner felt like a victory I had carved out of pain and sleepless nights. My footsteps echoed through the grand hall, bouncing against walls taller than any ceiling I had ever known. For a moment, I simply closed my eyes and listened, letting that sound wash over me like music. And then, as if summoned by fate, they appeared. The same faces that had once twisted in scorn now struggled to form smiles. My relatives, my so-called family, stood there as though the floor had been pulled from under them. Their eyes darted between me and the villa, disbelief choking the words they tried to form. One cousin, the loudest of them all back then, finally broke the silence. This is yours?" His voice cracked, the arrogance that once stained it now gone. I let the question hang in the air, savoring the weight of it. Then I nodded, slow and deliberate. "Yes," I said softly. "This is mine." The shock on their faces was sweeter than any revenge I could have planned. They had mocked me for dreaming too big, for daring to hope when I was penniless. Yet here I was, standing tall in the very dream they tried to crush. And as I looked at them, fidgeting and shifting under the gaze of the villa's walls, I realized something powerful. I no longer needed their approval. Their disbelief, their envy, their shame. It was all the justice I had ever wanted. The house wasn't just brick and stone. It was the story of my survival, carved into walls that now towered over those who once buried me. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. The real reckoning was still waiting. They stood there, fumbling with words, tripping over apologies that sounded hollow even before they left their mouths. I watched them, these people who once tossed me aside like I was nothing. Their eyes darted around the villa, unable to look me in the face for too long. And for the first time in years, I felt no anger, only clarity. One aunt finally stepped forward, wringing her hands like she always did when she wanted something. You've done so well for yourself. We always knew you would. We were just—" She hesitated, searching for an excuse. "We were just worried for you." The lie was so thin it almost made me laugh. Worried for me? No. They had mocked me, belittled me, shut doors in my face when I needed help. But I didn't say any of that. I didn't need to. The silence in the room carried the truth far louder than any accusation could. Another cousin piped up, his voice shaking. Maybe we could come by sometime. For dinner. Like old times? Like old times. The phrase stung, not because I longed for it, but because I finally understood how empty it had always been. There had never been good old times. There had only been me, sacrificing, giving, trying to belong to a family that never saw me as enough. I took a slow breath and let my gaze sweep across the room. The marble floors, the chandeliers, the space that echoed with a kind of dignity they would never grasp. "There won't be dinners," I said calmly, my voice steady. "Not here. Not anymore." Their faces fell, a ripple of disbelief passing through them. Some opened their mouths to argue, but the words never came. Because deep down they knew. They had lost their chance years ago when they chose mockery over compassion, cruelty over kindness. I walked toward the door, each step deliberate, the click of my shoes marking the finality of this chapter. As I opened the door and the sunlight spilled across the threshold, I turned back one last time. "You laughed when I had nothing," I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of all the years between then and now. "But now that I have everything, I don't need your laughter. Or your company." The words hung in the air like a verdict, sealing the space between us forever. I stepped out into the daylight, leaving their stunned silence behind me. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden. The villa stood tall, its white walls glowing against the horizon. But to me, it wasn't just a house. It was a monument to endurance, to survival, to the unbreakable truth that even the most broken beginnings can bloom into the brightest victories. Neighbors who once shook their heads in pity now nodded with respect. Some smiled warmly, their eyes reflecting pride I had never felt from my own blood. Strangers had shown me more kindness than family ever did. And perhaps that was the lesson life wanted me to learn. As I stood there, gazing up at the villa, I felt a peace I had never known. Not because I had proven them wrong, but because I no longer needed to prove anything at all. Their laughter, their cruelty, their betrayal, none of it defined me anymore. What defined me was the strength to rise, to keep going when everything told me I couldn't. I had built a life not out of revenge, but out of resilience. And that, more than the villa, more than the wealth, was the greatest victory of all. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not at them, not at anyone else, but at myself. The chapter of pain was closed. A new one, written in freedom and dignity, had just begun. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the villa in shades of fire and gold, I whispered the truth to the wind, a truth meant only for me. They can keep their laughter. I've found my peace.